Hello, guys, gals, and non-binary pals. Welcome to the newest episode of the Noobs and Knockouts podcast. I'm Austin. I'm a knockout. I've watched a lot of wrestling.
I'm David. I'm a noob. My wrestling experience is limited, but I'm willing to learn.
Yes. All right, and so today,
I just gotta say I'm feeling the pressure to like different ways of saying that every time. I feel like that needs to be like a thing. So like, I gotta start writing these down. But anyway.
That's true. All right. So for today, this is our first this is the first episode where we're really following up on an episode that we did before. That's something that I want to do on the podcast, but we just have been happen to jumping all over the place and doing different things. But this is a direct follow up to our second episode, and in fact, when I initially plotted out that episode, I kind of thought we'd watch this one then too, and then we got into it and we only watched one. So this has been a long time coming. But today we are watching oh my gosh, how did I already forget the date? The February 5th, February 5th, 1988 episode of The Main Event from the WWF. And basically that event comes from the fact that, Saturday night's main event was when WWF had an agreement with NBC where on the weeks when Saturday Night Live was off, WWF could take over that time slot and put on, put on their big wrestling shows. And those were so successful. NBC was, let's do a spinoff version that airs on Friday nights in prime time. And so
I just want to say for a substitute program for Saturday Night Live, and the substitute program is wrestling.
Yeah, it's WWE. That one of the biggest thing, I think a big part of that is one of the things is that like Vince McMahon and Dick Ebersol had became really close as part of this era of WWE, and so that helped. Vince McMahon had a really good end to NBC, and that's how you get that. That's how that kind of stuff happens.
That's fair.
Yeah. So it's true. Rich guys being friends. Who would have guessed it?
True.
So what do you do for the very first ever episode of The Main Event? I mean, this is your prime time on cable on network TV. What are you gonna do? Well, here's what you're gonna do. You're gonna do the rematch from WrestleMania 3. Hulk Hogan versus Andre the Giant for the WWF Championship. And this episode only has two matches, so there's really only two storylines to talk about. And so we're going to go ahead and start with the big one. There is Hogan and Andre. So kind of in the aftermath of Andre losing to Hogan at WrestleMania 3 in March 1987, Andre was always kind of lurking. He wasn't necessarily a front of the he wasn't the main threat to Hogan for a long period of time. Obviously, you don't want to burn out that matchup. You don't want people to get sick of seeing Hogan and Andre. So they backed off after the big Mania match, but it was always kind of in the background that Andre, he's still lurking. He still wants to be champion. And he's determined to beat Hogan. So he's always kind of there that that he'll be back. Like a great supervillain that is defeated by the superhero is he'll be back someday. And that day is really today. And so for some context to our viewers, I watched several episodes of WWF television in the lead up to our episode. I watched the very first, I watched 2 episodes of Saturday night's Main Event, and I watched the first ever Survivor Series pay-per-view and the very first Royal Rumble pay-per-view. And none of that really mattered. Was such a colossal waste of time, to be honest.
Oh no.
I told David about this so much while I was doing it. I was like, oh my God, why? Like stuff. It's so, I'm still getting the hang of how they told stories on TV in the 80s. So like for the biggest takeaway for me is the fact that, we watched episode 2, we watched the particular episode we did because that was the birth of the Mega Powers, the first time that Hogan and Macho Man Randy Savage kind of teamed up in any real capacity. And they had the big handshake, and there's been really no follow-up on that in any of the 4 shows I just mentioned.
Yeah.
They don't really talk about it.
Jesus Christ, why?
Why what?
Because they barely gave a crap about it in the episode too. Why are they doing this thing and then not paying attention to it? What is going on here? Like, what is this bizarre world of like getting the 2 like big guys together and then just like effectively pretending like it didn't happen? What? I'm struggling to understand the rationale here.
I don't get it either, because it's going to heat up a lot more after these 2 episodes that we're talking about. And after we watch it in the back half, I'll explain more about where this storyline goes. But I always kind of assumed that, like, even at this early on, there was, mention of it. It was important, right? Like, why wouldn't it be? Even if it wasn't like as big of a storyline as it would become later, surely they'd be building up to it, right? But not really. There was a lot more mention of it, of the incident with the Honky Tonk Man physically assaulting Miss Elizabeth, like that. They come back to that. They've come back to that a few times.
Of course they do. Of goddamn course they do. Because they're so obsessed with Elizabeth getting pushed around by this Elvis-looking freak for some reason. But, oh no, Macho Man and Hulkamania all of a sudden just barely exist, even though we gave them this epic moment together. Who cares when we can talk about the booby lady getting tossed down by the dude with the guitar?
And then Hogan, he's just kind of been he's been
Don't
fucking around.
Disrespect our woman.
And Hogan, he's been just fucking around with King Kong Bundy for the most part. He was kind of we saw King Kong Bundy in the last episode, and I had to watch 2 goddamn Hulk Hogan versus King Kong Bundy matches. And like, here's the thing. Bundy is fine as a wrestler. More look than he is actually really good or anything. He's more of he's a physical freak of a human being. But him and Hogan's matches were always boring as shit. And I would know this because I've watched 3 of them now, and I can confirm that they aren't good. Hogan and Bundy don't have good matches with each other. And so, yeah, I've had to watch.
Hogan doesn't seem like the type of guy you pair up against Bundy either. Like you sick the small, Davids to fell that Goliath. You don't send roided up Hulk Hogan into the ring to like it's like Sheamus versus Big Show last week. It's nice, I guess, but this isn't like, this does not effective storytelling via fighting make.
It's kind of funny you say that, because that was actually a big part of Hogan's kind of, his cycle of storylines. Kind of, there's basically like 3 different Hulk Hogan storylines in the 80s. Is you have Hogan as the all-American, rah-rah versus the evil foreigners who hate America. You have Hogan taking on someone who has one of the, the asshole better than you traits. He takes on guys who are super smart, or he takes on the rich assholes, those kind of guys, the cowardly shit heels, or he fights giants. Like it was kind of a trope in WWF, in the WWF at this time, that if you were like the size of King Kong Bundy or Andre the Giant, what they would basically like build you up for the express purpose of letting Hogan be the one to slay the monster. And he'd do this again and again and again.
Because the first 80s episode we watched, that was Hogan versus Sika, right?
Yes, that was kind of, I guess Evil Foreigner is probably the closest to that you can get to that archetype, but that is a little weird to his general style now that I think about it. But I guess it was some combination of big, strong guy.
I feel like the way Yeah, well, because I feel like the way they kind of characterize Sika, like even though he's not like Andre sized,
Mm-hmm.
his shtick is less "I hate America" and more "I am big, beefy, strong guy. Come at me, bro. I'll tear your head off like I tore the head
Mm-hmm.
off this chicken."
Yeah.
Like so, I can kind of see that, but again, just like Hogan himself is like a mini giant. Like, so why are we
Yeah.
like? I guess I get it because he's the big star, and I guess it's you got to see the big star like destroy the big monsters, but like
Mm-hmm.
just something about that just doesn't seem to really work.
It is always a little weird to see Hogan being portrayed as an underdog figure when he looks the way he looks. I agree.
Hmm.
See, John
Yeah,
Cena has the
yeah. Him and
John
Savage
Cena
are
had the
not.
exact same problem.
I'll give Cena this though. At least Cena kind of like his baby face and his demeanor
Mm-hmm.
lend him enough personality wise to make up for his stature not contributing to him as the underdog. Like he is played up as enough of kind of like this almost like um innocence that you can play that off as, oh, he's a big beefy dude, but sometimes people just take advantage of him and he doesn't see it
Mm-hmm.
coming. But Hogan is far too insane for that. Hogan like won't let you get too close to him without like socking you in the face. You can't get away with nearly as much with Hogan. So trying to underdog him is just bizarre.
Mm-hmm.
Like whereas it was a genuinely shocking moment to see Cena get dropped by Mark Henry. If that were
Yeah.
to happen between like Hogan and Andre, it's like, yeah, okay, cool, I guess.
Well, it worked. If it worked, it worked. I suppose. So Hogan,
Yeah. If people liked it, I know.
yeah. So Hogan dispatches of Bundy, and that was kind of just again a filler feud to get to where we're here, where his real feud now is with Andre again, but also the man behind Andre, Ted DiBiase, the $1 Million Man.
Yep.
And so I talked a little bit about him in the episode 2 because again I thought we might watch that episode then. But basically, as a recap, he's almost like maybe the best example of rich asshole thinks he's better than everybody else that you'll see in wrestling. There's very few better examples of it. And one thing that I just kind of realized watching these episodes that I really appreciate is that, you look at something like Alberto Del Rio, he's rich and he has the aesthetic, but it's kind of just that. It's kind of just an aesthetic. It doesn't really inform what his character does. Ted DiBiase, more than any other rich guy heel in wrestling, he was big into like using his money to get him places. For example, the reason Andre is with him now is because he gave a payoff to Andre's manager Bobby Heenan to buy out Andre's contract with him. Because and I watched a little bit of the clip when they did that, and you got people being like, Bobby Heenan, why would you do that? You've always said it's your goal to for one of your guys to beat Hogan and win the title. Why did you sell out like that? And then Heenan's obviously like, now my retirement's set. I'm set for retirement, baby. Money.
Yeah.
and, and
I like
so
money.
I like money. So what
Yeah.
and so where this comes in is that DiBiase wants to be WWF champion, but he doesn't want to fight Hogan for it. He is straight up offered Hogan money to just give him the title. And
Okay.
Hogan, of course, is like, no, I'm not going to do that. So now DiBiase, his plan foiled, is now on to his other plan where he's going to pay someone to do it for him. And that's where Andre really steps in here. Is that Andre exists. He has been paid off by the $1 Million Man, and he has made it clear that if he beats Hogan for the title, he's handing that title right off to Ted DiBiase.
Oh, that's
Like,
interesting. Okay,
Andre's
two
agreed
two
to the
two questions
payoff.
on that. Two questions on that.
Mhm.
One, we at least from the episode we watched during episode 2, it doesn't seem like the 80s are big into like the backstage reality show segments as much
Mhm.
as
They are
as
not.
much as the
No,
modern era is.
they
So
are not.
where do we see this payoff happening? If they don't really do that.
Well, they don't really do these like backstage skits. They do basically what this kind of stuff they would give off in like interview segments, promo segments with each other. Like they would just stand there and cut a promo. Like this would be where this kind of storytelling happens. I guess they do.
So this is not like some shady, underhanded. It's all out in the open.
Well, it is still shady and underhanded in that it's questionable whether or not DiBiase can actually do that.
Well, yeah.
But they're open. They're open about like that's what he's doing. That's what he did. Like everybody knows that DiBiase paid off Andre, and that Andre is going to gift that title to DiBiase if he can get away with it.
So second question then on that: how in the world do you justify with Andre the Giant's character him agreeing to a payoff like that? I admit I know a limited amount about in-ring Andre, but from what I glean about him, he seems far too prideful to just agree to that.
The story is kind of a combination of the thing that always happens of like Ted DiBiase is just giving him so much money you can't turn it down, and also the idea is almost at this point it's become like Andre doesn't even like. Andre, more so than becoming champion, he cares a lot more about just destroying Hulk Hogan at this point. Like he still wants the championship, but he is more interested in destroying Hulk Hogan and proving that he's better than Hogan. And so that allows him to be like, "Oh yeah, sure, take the title, whatever. As long as I can kill Hogan, I don't really care that much."
That makes sense.
And so that's kind of where that stands right now. The only other match on this episode is another rematch. Macho Man Randy Savage versus the Honky Tonk Man for the Intercontinental title again. And
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, the story is pretty much we've already been talking about it enough. It's really just a continuation of like he attacks Elizabeth and Savage also just wants the Intercontinental title back. So they're still fighting. On one of the Saturday night's main events, actually, Randy Savage actually fought one of the Hart Foundation members, Bret Hart, and in a singles match, and it was awesome, which you'd expect because you haven't really had a chance to see this, but Bret Hart is one of the most technically skilled wrestlers in history. So of course he had a really good match. Episode, right? It is, but he didn't really wrestle. Like, oh yeah, he did. I forgot he wrestled Goldust, but but like even in this era of time, he's like a top. He's like one of the more talented in-ring wrestlers they have going, and so obviously him and Savage have a banger of a match.
I will admit I am excited to see that because when we watched the episode for episode 2, I like the vibes I got from Hart Foundation were more kind of like these kind of screwball, not to be taken too seriously henchmen types.
Which at the time they kind of were. They kind of were in the fact that they were just stuck kind of in the tag team division. But the talent was there on the part of Bret Hart anyway. And like in the mid '90s during the New Generation era, which we'll eventually do anyway, like Bret Hart is an anchor. Keeping the ship afloat during that time period, and if nothing else, you will absolutely see that Bret Hart is head and shoulders above everybody else at that point in time.
Jesus, I'm genuinely excited to see that in action because one of the biggest things I enjoy when doing these episodes are like the really technically skilled wrestlers, and to know that like Bret Hart, who I've just kind of up to now been like kind of. He's all right on like to know that he's going to show that off. It feels satisfying.
No, I get that you have not that just by design. We haven't really had a good opportunity to kind of see him in action at his best. But yeah, no, Bret Hart's best is up there with anybody's best in the ring.
Yeah, no, it was like Claire watching Cody Rhodes last week, and and we were like, no, we promise he's actually really good.
No, this is actually that's one of my favorite things about this podcast. Honestly, is kind of getting the reactions of you and then Claire of like people who I know who from watching wrestling are actually really good. Honestly, super swears, but like you because we're watching very small segments of time, and sometimes not the best segments of time. You don't necessarily see that, and it's like, this is kind of funny to me. It's like the Undertaker thing from episode 4.
Well, it's part of the Undertaker thing. Well, honestly, like knowing kind of how you view Bret Hart, like I compliment you for kind of keeping your cards close to your chest when I was talking about the Hart Foundation on episode 2, and I was like, they're all right. I mean, they're kind of like Saturday morning cartoon.
I mean,
henchins.
But like, I got it, because I understand that on that episode they kind of were just kind of like, it wasn't an episode that really heavily showed off how good they are. And so
they were there to be backup for Honky Tonk, and that's about it.
Right. So I guess that kind of covers what we need for the episode. I guess I'll make some observations from, everything else I watched, just to try to have some excuse, try to make some justification for me having to watch it. So Survivor Series is always fun. That, just so you know what that is that was actually the second pay-per-view brand that WWE did after WrestleMania. And it was basically in its original incarnation, it was a bunch of the only matches were these 4-on-4 and 5-on-5 tag team matches. And kind of what made them significant and interesting was that they were elimination tag matches. So as most tag matches we've seen at this point, first guy gets pinned, that team loses. Now, in this time, if you get pinned, the match still goes on, but you're now one man down. And so you get these kind of interesting, like, mismatched number scenarios that you don't get in normal wrestling matches that only end after one pin.
Okay.
And like, when they're really fun, they are really fun. When they're good, they're really fun to watch. Absolutely. And then
that would be phenomenal.
Yep. And then the Royal Rumble, we've not talked about that before, but also the Royal Rumble is, my opinion, the best wrestling match ever invented by the WWF. The Royal Rumble is basically a battle royal, except it doesn't start with everybody in the ring. It starts with 2 guys in the ring, and every couple of minutes, another guy enters the match.
Oh, yes. That sounds like it could be a real interesting time.
It is, because you get all these interesting, like, every couple of minutes, the dynamics of the match change when a new guy enters the match. And people are still get eliminated, of course. It ends the same way a battle royal does, is that, their goal is to throw everybody else out of the ring, and last guy standing wins. But, you add these new, because the numbers people are constantly changing. New guys will enter that change the whole face of the match. It's an endurance test for the people who start from number 1 versus, a guy who comes in who's the last man in. He's going to have the easiest path to victory. Like, especially when they talk about, you look at it, is like, and the match length, they all go like an hour long. So like, if you're to win the match from the start, you have to wrestle for an hour, versus if you're one of the last guys in, you can win in 10 minutes. It's absolutely, it's incredible. And it wasn't the case at this point in time, but eventually they would change the match, and it wasn't just, instead of just being a fun match to do for the sake of like having a fun match, they put a stipulation on it where the winner of the match will receive a match for the WWF Championship at WrestleMania. So if you win the Royal Rumble, you get to wrestle for the biggest championship on the biggest show of the year.
Oh, that's good.
Oh yeah, it's incredible. Always one of the highlights of any given year of wrestling is the Royal Rumble. But this time, this was
there seems to be something. There seems to be something very storyline intriguing about these sort of like wrestle for a big boy spot sort of matches, whether that be something like a Royal Rumble or a Cash in the Bank match. Like the possibility. There's just something about I don't even know how to describe it, but the story potential that goes along with pitting people against each other for for being top dog, where it doesn't come down to like, who's won the most, like in, the most title matches or whatever. It just
Yeah.
comes down to this one moment.
Yeah, this it
Who
doesn't matter.
can
It
who
doesn't
can
matter what you've done before. All that matter if you win this one match, you're set, and you have your
yeah.
shot at being the best. You don't have to have this long, success to be able to win this match.
Which I think is even more exciting with a Royal Rumble, since there's more than two, so you can throw a number of people in there. And sure, I'm sure they're obviously not going to like, have some random jobber win it and be like, you're getting a spot on pay-per-view. But like, there's that potential
but in
for
story,
surprise
they could.
that the unconventional choice. Yeah, and there's the potential for that for some unconventional choice to get that top spot, and it really can. I'm sure it'll kind of have you at the edge of your seat, being like, who's gonna get it? Because like that seems less predictable than your usual like straight up 1v1 heel versus face fare.
Absolutely. I guess the only other kind of observation I want to make is that I talked to David a little about this, but we keep charting like what is women's wrestling like at whatever point in time we're watching. And this is, if nothing else, probably the most bizarre to look back on when you think about it, because obviously we haven't watched any women's wrestling from the 80s, and spoilers, we're not going to do that today either. But at this point in time, there is not just a women's championship. There's a women's tag team championship.
Oh.
And the women that actually wrestled for the tag team championship were actually pretty good. The Jumping Bomb Angels and the Glamour Girls were kind of like the forever rivals of that belt, and they were actually pretty good. Not going to go into this because they're not in this episode. I'm not going to go into the story of like what happened to the tag team championships, besides saying that they were retired in 1989 and were never seen again until they brought them back in 2018. Yes. 2019. That's it. So they brought him back last year. And so the women's have a tag team championship again, but this is definitely kind of bizarre to look back on, because when an era where they otherwise don't really care about women's wrestling, but they have like tag team championships, and the women are actually pretty good.
Oh dang. Well, I mean, this is pre-Divas, so even if we're not watching anything with this episode, that's at least like some solace that like this is pre the goddamn butterfly belt. So yeah, I'm here for it.
The butterfly belt came in like 2009, 2010 was when that was introduced.
Yeah.
But anyway, that covers everything I think we got to talk about for this episode, and so. We will see you guys in the back half as we talk about what is the most watch episode of pro wrestling ever. It had this had a Nielsen rating of 15.2 and 33 million viewers.
Whoo, boy, big boys all around.
Big boy numbers out here. All right. See you guys in the back half. And we are back. We have just finished the February 5th, 1988 episode of The Main Event. And I guess let's start with the hot topic of the day, which is the fake referee angle.
What the hell was that? That just like came so out of left field. Like,
oh no, it was very out of left field. So for those who haven't seen the episode, Hogan and Andre ends with the referee counting Hogan down, pinned 1, 2, 3, even though Hogan kicked out early, and awarding the championship to Andre the Giant. And then it is revealed that the referee that refereed the match was an imposter of another referee on the roster, and he was paid off by DiBiase to cheat Hogan out of the title.
Which there was this weird thing of like I said, it came out of nowhere. B,
Mm-hmm.
like, what's really funny too is it took the kind of motif of Ventura bitching about how like the last Hogan Andre match had a biased ref. It kind of took that meme of Jesse Ventura kind of like harping on it a little bit, and then just like took it to the extreme with like, nope, now we have like a potentially paid off ref. Which one's the real one? We don't know. And
Mm-hmm.
Jesse Ventura just screaming about bias one way or the other, which if you know anything about Jesse Ventura now is really simultaneously sad and hilariously
Mm-hmm.
prescient thing for him to be screaming about. Um,
Yeah,
Bias in the judgment call.
yeah. Obviously, there's not a for this era of time, not a terrible kind of like storyline there of like of this whole time you got everyone on the side of Andre and DiBiase screaming about how that Andre was cheated and the referee was biased for Hogan, and then when this match happens, literally you paid off the referee to cheat for your side.
And well and like according to Hogan, like paid off a referee to like, it wasn't just like a guy who just happened to look a lot like the actual referee. It was like apparently like DiBiase like throwing this dude into plastic surgery and everything just to like, which imagine like okay, look, I know the whole meme is that DiBiase is like the wealth and people do anything for it, but
Mm-hmm.
imagine like going through a life-changing surgery to look
Mm-hmm.
completely different potentially for the rest of your life,
Yep,
um
just for this
just
one
for like
match.
a 15-minute match just so DiBiase could win a freaking sports title
Yeah,
illegitimately.
I believe that they retcon that away anyway because that was legitimately the twin brother of Dave Hebner, Earl Hebner, and I believe they
Yeah, I was
retconned
gonna
that
say
away.
like
Like, no, obviously that's that whole part about it
yeah,
being
they look
plastic
like
surgery is
twins.
horse shit. Yeah, and it's really just the fact that Dave Hebner, who was a referee for WWF, had a twin brother, Earl, and so they ran this angle with that purpose.
Which imagine like the bulbs that must have appeared over their heads when they learned
Mm-hmm.
that like Dave Hebner had a twin brother, an identical twin. um just like imagining the story beats they could do with that. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's the sort of like, you can't pay for that kind of ironically when we're talking about storylines involving the $1 Million Man, but you can't pay for that kind of like story convenience. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
just too good.
Yeah, yeah, they saw that layup opportunity, but
Yeah, no,
it's so wild.
but that was
It's
bizarre.
Yeah, it's so wild that like Hulk Hogan was WWF champion for 5 years at this point. This was the end of a 5 year reign by Hulk Hogan as the WWF champion. Was with a
Yeah,
fake
yeah,
referee
and
nonsense.
I gotta say, like, this was one of, I think this might have been like the first, or at least one of the first, like, bad endings we've seen
Mm-hmm.
at the end of an episode, and it was kind of a cool one to see, like, just Hulk utterly disgraced because of this weird batshit plot that DiBiase put in place because he was just so goddamn desperate to win this title.
Mm-hmm. And it doesn't even work. Let's go. I'm going to go ahead and let's go ahead and move on because we're not going to do any more from this storyline because the shows that we have to watch to continue the storyline I don't like, so I don't want to watch them again. So we're just going to
Fair
not talk
enough.
about this anymore. So after this episode, so basically what happened is that Andre's win is legitimate. They jacked President Jack Tunney, the fake president of the WWF of this point in time. He was like, Andre won the match. That's fine enough, but you can't just hand the title to another person. So it's vacated. The title is vacated. So in the record books, DiBiase didn't win the title, and Andre was champion for about 30 seconds because he immediately surrendered
Oh.
the title. And that is the only time Andre would ever be WWF champion, was this time. So
That's kind of sad.
oh yeah. So where that plot line goes is, is that now there's no champion. What are we going to do? So for WrestleMania 4, they plotted out a 14-man single elimination one night championship tournament at WrestleMania, and the winner would become the WWF champion. And the show is complete ass because the tournament is boring. but But to skip ahead to what happens, the finals of the match are Randy Savage versus Ted DiBiase. And with the assist from Hulk Hogan, Randy Savage wins and becomes WWF champion for the first time in his career. So that's why also
okay, fair.
To kind of touch on the other thing of this episode is that's why like the Honky Tonk Man Randy Savage storyline ends on this episode is so that Randy Savage can kind of move up and become WWF champion. He ain't got time to mess around with the Intercontinental title anymore. He's going for the big goal. He's going for the big prize.
Yeah. I mean the funny thing about with the Savage Honky Tonk thing too is like with it feels like such a fizzle out for that feud. Like I like the fact that like because the feud was going on before the episode we watched, the first 80s episode we watched, right?
A little bit. I don't know when exactly it started, but definitely like that. The first one we watched was kind of like almost like at the not an inciting incident, but like that was what made it personal, so to speak. Like it was like before anything that happened before was kind of more of a simple like I was the champion, I want my championship back. But then after him assaulting Elizabeth and then clonking Savage over the head with a guitar, now it's like I fucking hate you.
Well, because like it feels so anticlimactic to have like this kind of relatively short-lived feud, and then just have it fizzle out too with just he beat like this match just had Honky Tonk at his most aggressively macking on Elizabeth, and Savage ripped him a new one for it. Didn't even get the belt out of it because he won by count out rather than submission.
Like a dummy, like a dummy. But he just beats up up Honky Tonk Man. Still, he wins by count out, but you can't win the championship by count out. So, so good job. You won the match, but you don't get the title out of it.
Yeah, Austin seemed personally offended by that turn of events when we were watching. Like he was just like, "No, you dumbass."
It's I get it in the sense that they don't want they wanted Savage to win the feud because he's the good guy, and it's his girlfriend that is whose honor is being impugned here. But they don't want him to be the champion because they want him to. They already have plans for him to become the WWF champion, so they don't want him to win the belt off of Honky Tonk Man. So you have to craft this insane, this convoluted and logically deficient story beat where he just beat where Savage can't keep his eye on the ball enough to even recognize that sure he's going to win the match, but he doesn't win the title, which is what he was competing for.
Well, like, but in line with their weird obsession with Elizabeth, like none of the narrative seems to pay attention to that. It's just we successfully defended Elizabeth's honor.
Yeah,
here's
the story
pulling her into the ring for the
the story became about defending Elizabeth's honor, and in that sense, they play it out perfectly. But I'm just not a fan of like that. I don't like it. I'm okay when like a heel does that intentionally. Like if the match had been Honky Tonk running away to keep his title, that wouldn't have been a great ending to that story either, I guess. But like in a vacuum, I'm okay with that kind of thing. But I think it's dumb when the good guys don't pay enough attention to what they're doing and they cost themselves the championship like that. Like that's just not a story.
Which is just a weird. it's a weird angle for the writers to take it too, because
Mm-hmm.
it, again, I'm just trying to wrap my head around like just the thought process that went into how they crafted this whole storyline, kind of stretching from the first 80s episode we watched to now,
Mm-hmm.
where it just seems like their priorities are so skewed from what you would expect them to be based on what they set up toward the end of that episode.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because like
And like now that and
I
like
mean,
and
it's the
like
stuff we talked about. Yeah.
And like, as I was just gonna say, is that like, you would think that there would be some interaction, and this goes back to what we started at the beginning when like how they aren't really they are not yet coming back to the Hogan Savage team up. Like you would think it's in any regard, and in some way, Hogan would have had a physical interaction with either of the Heart Foundation or the Honky Tonk Man. The guys he saved Savage from in that other episode, but he doesn't. He doesn't come back into this storyline at
No,
all.
no, and like it almost feels in a way like the writers were simultaneously like just trying to ride out like they got sidetracked and they just wanted to like ride out how far they could go with those sidetracks, like
Mm-hmm.
again with how convoluted this freaking Hogan Andre thing is turning out to be, and with again how weird they are about fixating on defending Elizabeth, but at the same time, with how kind of quickly all of this ends up playing out, at least like the I guess the weird thing is like the Savage side of things seems like they got too obsessed with Elizabeth, realized they got too obsessed with Elizabeth, and just tried to like be like, okay, we're done with this now, so they could have Savage move on, like you talked about. But Hogan's still stuck in the Andre thing for a little bit because of how convoluted this whole goddamn ref situation is.
Mm-hmm.
So like it almost feels like they like accidentally like shot off the Savage Hogan thing like way too early, and now they're just kind of like in this weird time vortex where one of them's like prematurely ready to go and the other's like going to take way too much goddamn time to get to the point where he can like get back to that story where he's interacting with like his fellow superstar. um Oh, it's just this weird what should be, especially for a special episode where the whole point is that it's Hogan and Savage headlining each in their own matches. The fact that they don't even acknowledge each other's existence for the whole time, we don't even see them in the same room. It's just so much like
Mm-hmm.
why like what is this sloppy writing? This is
Like,
just
yeah, it's
sloppy.
like,
And worst comes to worst is just what a freaking bad villain Honky Tonk Man is at this point. Like he's just so
mm-hmm.
like boring. Like why are we wasting our time with this?
Yeah, I do kind of agree that it almost feels like that first plot beat was almost too early because they clearly weren't really ready to
Mhm.
advance on that in any way. It's not going to be advanced really until WrestleMania 4 is Hogan when Hogan assists Savage to win the title, then it becomes a much more regular thing of Hogan and Savage together as a team, as partners. That becomes more of a regular thing as opposed to, but like the handshake happens
Yeah.
happens 6 months before that.
It's just like I can just envision so many smarter ways to write this whole arc out.
Mm-hmm.
And none of them involve just plodding along with their own individual things for
Mm-hmm.
months after their meeting.
Yeah.
Like you can have them do this. You can have this exact same setup, but just have them interact, have them have moments of and I know the format of how they cut promos in this time isn't as conducive to that as it would be in this day and age,
Mm-hmm.
but you can finagle that in there. These are the two biggest stars. Having them talk to each other once in a while isn't an impossible task. What are
Mm-hmm.
you doing?
Why couldn't like Savage and Elizabeth come out to help Hogan when his Andre match at any point? Like he spent like the whole match you have Virgil and DiBiase getting in the way. Why at any point
Yeah.
couldn't Savage and Elizabeth be there to kind of even the odds, so to speak, before you get to
Yeah, no. And
the ref stuff, which only really plays a factor in the end.
or like or have Savage be there to have Savage come up to Hulk while he's cutting while he's freaking out toward the end of the episode about like the conspiracy that was just enacted against him, and have Savage be like, "Hey, you were there for me. I'm gonna be there for you." Like
brother.
something, anything. God, please.
Okay,
but it's just nothing.
Like WrestleMania 4 to 5, like the Mega Power storyline is legitimately really good once they actually start caring about it. Like WrestleMania 4, it starts there, it kind of ends at WrestleMania 5. And that year-long arc is actually really good. And so that's why I'm just super surprised that like the first 6 months, technically speaking, is so like not really there when I thought it was there, when I expected it to be there, as someone who hadn't seen the storyline play out before. Just I've know about it, so like I expected it to play out more on TV in these early months than it did.
Yeah, it just turns into one giant nothing burger, which again is compounded in its disappointment by a few extra things too. Okay, the Hulk side of the storyline is pretty entertaining. While it's still like slightly depressing to watch him fight with Andre because of just how much you can see Andre slowing down and how much they're already starting to build around his limited mobility. The whole like intrigue, as dumb as it is, about the doppelganger ref
It's
and
the
and
goof.
Andre
It's like the best of goofball
and Andre
soap
performing
opera.
well. Yeah. Yeah, and Andre still like acted the part well. Again, this is we like when we talked. This was around Princess Bride was happening. And so like Andre's clearly still a talented actor, and he's good at playing out these really kind of legitimately intimidating moments. Either just kind of standing there, menacingly,
his
or
problem
having
is
his
it's
"I
not that
surrender
Hogan.
the belt to Ted DiBiase."
Yeah, it's not a problem. It's not a problem
Um,
of Andre can't act. It's that he can't move anymore.
Yeah. So for like as depressing as that is, there's still like we have Andre's acting to help. We have DiBiase, just that whole plot line being about his devious machinations, having a decent amount of like intrigue for it for this being goofy goofy Saturday morning wrestling where the villains are all conniving like little weirdos. It works, but then we have then we have the Savage side of the storyline, which again, our main components are weirdly obsessing over that time Honky Tonk Man pushed Elizabeth, and Honky Tonk Man himself, who when you first see him packs a hilarious punch. Like, that first episode with him, I was like, this is so funny. This is like an Elvis impersonator. And he actually is kind of intimidating. But he's just, like I told you when we were watching, he just does the same thing over and over and over again. And it's just like, yeah, I get it. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, no. Honky Tonk Man is very, very one note. And he kind of only works in this era. He kind of only works in this era of time where you can be a one note villain.
Yeah. Which again, I get it, but I get why it was appealing then, and I get why people get a kick out of it. And to an extent, I still get a kick out of it. Like he has his moments where he works for me, but I'm the nerd. I'm like the storytelling nerd who just wants like compelling villains. Who loves it when you get a guy in there, who has more or can just generally continue to vary the mood or vary the aesthetic enough to the point where you're like where you don't really get tired of it, which again Andre does a really good job at here. He's playing along with this storyline that seems kind of out of character for the big oafish giant to kind of take on, just because he's so obsessed with taking down Hogan, that he's willing to bend his ear to DiBiase and do his bidding just for that chance to get him and beat him up. And there's something that is kind of deeply compelling about that. Again, partially because the personal stuff we know about Andre at the time, but just the writing feels so weak, and I know that's kind of the point, but I also know that there are legions of wrestling fans we will piss off by saying this, and I don't understand how that is a controversial statement. Like, I'm not trying to like have a hot take moment here, not trying to like start beef with any future audience members, but I legitimately do not understand how it's a hot take to say this is a lackluster. This is kind of lackluster. Give me better writing, please.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean I agree. As I don't think that I think that this wasn't like a great period of like super strong writing overall. I mean, it has its moments. I and like I think that the Hebner thing is kind of hilarious and kind of may it
Yeah.
works really well, but this isn't the kind of thing that you see super often. Like it's real like
Mm-hmm.
it's or at the very least it's there's a lot of it's very basic writing right at this point in time. They're really not trying to try anything super crazy, super and the super complex in terms of the writing style. You'll like you have like and so I think that it's kind of a conceit of the era that like you're not really getting you're not really going to find a whole lot of complex or nuance here. It's a lot of like the fact that it is kind of a Saturday cartoon and that's very fun. And it's
Yeah.
and it's
But
and it's backed up by and it's bolstered by the fact that you have a lot of strong personalities at this point in time.
but how was this the golden age? I simply don't like, aside from the fact that we have the fun personalities up there, I
Mhm.
just, something about it just does not connect for me. How was this the peak of WWE? Like, for as flawed as some of the future stuff comes, whether that be like Vince Russo era writing where he goes like way too
Mhm.
grim dark and kind of like way too like turn wink at the camera at some points, modern era which while having some really great moments can still be overly sanitized and still have some yikesy content. Like,
Mhm.
it only goes up from here, ultimately. So how was this the golden age? Why are we not in a golden age now? I don't. There's something about it. I just don't like watching this. This should have felt so much grander than it did.
Mhm. I wish I could tell you because like what would I know about it? I was born in 95. Like I even like I could not tell you what it's very hard for me to get into like old WWF. Like that's not really my cup of tea overall because of the stuff you're talking about. And like I can appreciate a lot of it. I understand its appeal and I understand that it was very appealing and in some parts I get it, but this isn't a golden age for me. It's the golden age in
Mhm.
the sense that this is like probably the most mainstream popular WWE has ever been. The late 90s is the only period that could even come close. And Hogan is the biggest star is arguably the biggest star they've ever had, which is while he was there. I'm going to preface that
I think without question.
because
Well,
The Rock is a bigger star than Hogan is, but The Rock didn't become that big of a star until after he started doing movies full time. But in terms of
that's
being a star when he was wrestling, there's never been a bigger than Hogan.
mhm.
I think Hogan and Savage carried that ship very far at this point in time.
Yeah. And again, surrounded by a colorful rogues gallery behind them. And
Mm-hmm.
I get that. Um but again, this show is kind of this podcast, I mean to
Mm-hmm.
say. I feel like kind of the MO of this podcast is sort of examining the different perspectives that can be brought to this one singular art form and the many things that can be taken away from it. And as someone, and kind of from my perspective, where I'm very much into how is a story being crafted? What's the emotional through line?
Mm-hmm.
What are the character arcs? What are what are the opportunities given to the performers to really create something unique feeling, or at least, even if not totally unique, something that stands out as this is something that you can't that you don't get out of a normal garden variety, piece of entertainment. This is something
Mm-hmm.
that's a little bit special, a little bit unique. And yes, it has those twinges of that. But I feel like so many of those, like so many of what gives it that kind of special standout nature is so contextual to the time period it's from.
Mm-hmm.
Now experiencing it as somebody who was born, close to 2 decades after the start of that decade,
Mm-hmm.
um, who has no experience with that era until now, when I'm just kind of getting started, from a completely like outsider perspective. Just something about it does not land.
Mm-hmm.
And again, appreciate, but can't just get on board with it. Ultimately, I
Yeah,
wish I could. I wish I could like be swept away by this.
I do too. I feel like this is I think this era of wrestling more than any other is very much a you had to be there kind of era. Like I even think that
Hmm.
the late '90s edgy ass bullshit is more easily accessible to my eyes than even this is.
Well, that's God. I hate to say this, but that I feel like that's thanks to Vince Russo being there, who, while he had his very horrible moments as a writer, like
Mm-hmm.
also put so much thought into kind of how he crafted everything,
Like
that it gave it
Vince
that
Russo
slight
was
like
absolutely trying to write a TV show in a way
yeah,
that
exactly.
I don't think that at this point in time WWE was super interested in. And like I talked about that is that like
This is
this isn't an era of like weekly prime time drama TV the way that you see wrestling now, WWE now, that it didn't try to be like that in the 80s.
yeah. It's a sports show that just
Mm-hmm.
happens to have some like soap opera tier drama going on every now and then.
That's a good way of describing it.
Yeah, and the thing is, with this as a sports show, the moments when I appreciate it the most are when there's good in ring work being done. Which, when it comes to this episode, eh, the
Yeah.
savage the savage as we talked about, the savage honky tonk fight was pretty lackluster in that regard. Like,
I
neither
feel
of
like
them are
yeah,
particularly
yeah.
like gifted tech,
Well, Savage is, but there's only
and
so much.
pairing
Savage
them
is
up together.
very good. Savage is
Well,
but there's only so much he can do with Honky Tonk Man, who is not, who is a lot, who isn't as
yeah,
gifted as he is, and even when he is, he's more. Like there's very much a kind of old school philosophy of like if you're a heel, like you're not gonna play a character who's as technically gifted. You're gonna do a lot more like shtick and bullshit and cartoony hijinks. So even if even if Honky Tonk Man is capable of more than what he's showing in this episode, he's not going to do that with the character he's playing.
yeah.
And then
Which
Hogan and Andre, neither of them are super gifted in ring. Well, Andre used to be, but now Andre's
well,
broken down,
Hogan.
and Hogan can be, but his character also kind of lends itself to like this hot dog and showmanship more than it does being a super serious wrestler.
Yeah, no. What's most impressive about the Hogan Andre fight is like watching for how they built the fight around Andre.
Mm-hmm.
That's the most interesting part of that for me, which was an entertaining thing to kind of watch and analyze, because you can see how they set up. Basically, it's like it's almost, it plays out. Uh, this is kind of a dumb analogy, but it's almost like a doubles comedy act, right? Where you have the
Mm-hmm.
straight man and you have the jokester, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever the non-straight man is called in that sort of setup.
Yeah.
Hogan's there to be the straight man, set up the no pun intended punchlines for Andre, um,
Mm-hmm.
for then Andre to then take and execute on, because they
Mm-hmm.
were so artfully set up for him.
Yeah,
Um,
like Andre isn't capable of really doing a whole lot himself, so it's all about like what is happening around Andre.
yeah, yeah, no, it was something. It was kind of it was interesting to kind of really get to focus on the choreography itself when it comes to this match, because
Mhm.
this seems like one of those matches that was a lot more heavily choreographed, as it kind of needed to, and that made it interesting in and of itself. Whereas, like, Savage Honky Tonk felt a lot more improv, and
Mhm.
the entertainment value came a lot more from kind of all the chaos that was happening around the ring and within it.
Mhm.
But that chaos can only kind of take you so far, because, like, again, maybe this is, different than how fans of the era would see it, but, like, you can only go do so much of, like, everybody's freaking out during this match, like, before it gets to a point of, once again, yeah, I get it.
Like, move on and
So,
do
like, yeah.
something else. And like,
Yeah,
I
exactly. This kind of, yeah, yeah.
like you like at some point you have to wrestle. Like you can only do
Which,
so
I
much
mean,
stick.
yeah, and, like, this was a better. I will say this wasn't, like, the worst merging of, like, shtick and wrestling
Mhm.
that I've ever seen, but it's, said as if I've seen enough to,
Mhm.
like, give you stories about it. But like, it wasn't the worst. But again, there comes a point where, like, okay, yeah, we're just kind of going circling around because Savage and Honky
Mhm.
Tonk have to drag this match out for
Yeah.
the fact that it's, like, one of two matches in a 48-minute episode.
And like I feel like
So, like,
the first match we watched of theirs was way better. Like now that we've seen them fight twice, I think the first one was from episode 2 was a lot better than this one.
oh yeah, absolutely. Because it wasn't nearly as dragged out,
Mhm.
and it had some great climactic moments. Whereas here, there wasn't a good flow to the match. Like, it was all just sort of chaotic.
Mhm.
Whereas with the first one, there was a followable arc that, starts off just normal, but then it escalates and it escalates and it escalates, to the point where, like, Savage is in grave danger, and then out pops Elizabeth with Hogan on her arm,
Mhm.
and it becomes this gigantic what the hell of awesomeness.
Mhm.
But here it was just kind of like the crescendo was, oh, so first they're fighting and now everybody's fighting, but, like, not
Yeah,
actually
yeah,
fighting, just kind of chasing each other around the outside of the ring
yeah.
until Honky Tonk leaves and stuff
Especially
breaks
because
out.
this is a point of time where like you're not going to see the women managers really get physically involved. So like it's a whole lot of like
No.
running around the ring, which again that's really funny because as I pointed out to David, that this episode saw the third piece of the Honky Tonk entourage group, his girlfriend Peggy Sue, who was Sherry Martel in a wig. And Sherry Martel was the women's champion at this time. In
Just
fact,
keep treating those women with respect,
Sherry
WWF.
Martel
Keep
was
keep keep the court.
Sherry Martel was women's champion for 440 days.
Ooh.
And
See,
mostly
that's
because
a
they
decent amount of
barely
time.
cared about it enough to have her wrestle for it.
Son of a bitch! Why? I mean, again, as I always, here's how this interaction always goes with myself when we talk about the lady wrestlers. Why? Well, actually, I know why, but it still sucks.
I already promised David that the next storyline we work on for a after we're done with the Summer of Punk is we're gonna go watch the Women's Revolution in WWE. We're gonna watch that.
Oh, bless you, sir.
Call
Bless
us
your
in like
heart.
4 months and we'll be there. But
Yeah, yeah. We'll bring out our full, like, inner feminist. We'll turn away
yeah,
all the um we'll turn away all the gamer gators on with this one,
yeah.
baby.
So yeah, but
But
yeah,
anyway,
like at this
that was
point in
so
time,
random.
at this point in time, like women's wrestling in America in a larger scale was pretty much run through the Fabulous Moolah, who was kind of not. I want to say kind of not. That's not true, but she was still had a great relationship with Vince McMahon at this point. This is the women's wrestling fell off the bat because they used to have Wendy Richter was kind of a big star for them
Mhm.
in the mid 80s, right when they start the WrestleMania thing, is because she was both she was really good and really she was young, attractive, good at wrestling, and also she's had an on-screen association with Cyndi Lauper, so she was kind of a seen as a big deal. But
Yeah.
Wendy Richter wanted to get paid a little more fairly for being a top star, even if though she's a woman. And Vince was like, I don't want to do that, thanks. And the Fabulous Moolah didn't like her because Wendy Richter had more star potential than Moolah, who at this point was like an old lady in her late 40s, early 50s. And so Moolah screws Wendy Richter out of the title, and Wendy Richter quits and never shows up again. And right after that, after the big star is gone, they're like, well, who cares about women? We don't.
Why?
There's
There's so much dumb, petty, stupid drama, like IRL, kayfabe, and
yeah.
it just ruins everything constantly. Mostly because Vince McMahon is an apathetic dipshit.
I mean, there's also I didn't think I'd get to talk about this story on the podcast, but I guess if we're already here for stories where Fabulous Moolah is a terrible person, how she also killed the women's tag team titles, because killing the singles, the world championship for women wasn't enough, is the story of like. Okay, so for context, Fabulous Moolah used to be a trainer and agent for for most of the women's talent that worked for WWE. She was also a shitbag who would like steal money. So it would basically be kind of like, is there an example of this kind of example? Is like, for example, the off at the front, Vince McMahon gives Moolah $500 as the pay for the women on that show. Moolah would take $100 as her fee, and then she'd hand the women $200 and say that was all they got, and then she pockets the other 200.
Yeah, of course.
So she'd do that kind of shit.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that like. See, the funny thing about that is like, and again, not to get like too off track, but the funny thing about that is that like. That's the sort of thing that feels like it would play out in a kayfabe storyline, but it was like real IRL,
no, that actually
like dumb
happened.
stuff that actually like. Yeah, that was like the lie, like art imitates life, imitates art of course we can't just keep this to like all fictional. In the world of WWE, if Vince McMahon is involved anywhere and like the sort of people he likes to rub elbows with are involved anywhere in positions of power, stuff's gonna get really dumb really quickly, and it's gonna lead to awful things like women's tag team being killed off for almost like what 3 or 4 decades.
Yeah, but back to the story of how she killed the tag team division is basically at the time the Glamour Girls, Leilani Kai and Judy Martin broke ties with Moolah over this, being like, yeah, we're not going to have you continue to take money from us, and so as a retaliation response, while they were overseas in Japan, Moolah made a call to Judy Martin and told her that plans have changed, and while you're over in Japan, you gotta beat the Jumping Bomb Angels for the tag team titles. Those are the current champions, and they couldn't get confirmation from Pat Patterson, who was the head booker at the time, or Vince McMahon. They couldn't get a hold of either of them because they're in Japan. So to confirm this story, so they go along with it. And then they get back to America, and then Pat Patterson and Vince McMahon are like, what the fuck was that? Why'd you do that? You ruined our plans. And like just berated them and that was basically the death of the women's tag team division for the rest of till 2019. Because after that, they stopped caring real fast about that after Moolah pulled that shit. And that's the last Moolah story I'm going to tell for now, because she is a massively horrible human being. But I'm going to save that for when we actually get a match with Moolah on it. But yeah, that was
that's dang.
That was
One
the
person
death.
causing that level of a ripple effect. God.
Yep.
Dude, this era is just so bizarre. Like,
Mhm.
of just all the things they have going on too. Like this, I don't even like kind of know like how to really sum it up well. Aside from like this is just WWF like throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks.
Oh, I don't
And
think
the really
I don't think
funny
you've
thing
seen
about that
that. I
is
don't
the
think you've seen that yet because that's new generation. Is if you think throwing everything at a wall is happening here, wait till we get to the new generation.
Yeah, but like I was re-listening to episode 2 a little while back, and I had mentioned something about like maybe part of the reason this was so popular in this time was like it just throws so much of the audience that with the feel of like being culturally significant, that the audience just kind of like lapped it all up. So I kind of
Mm-hmm.
like the whole vibe of just like bombarding people with as much like content as humanly possible, each with their own kind of cartoony setups and payoffs and whatever to
Mm-hmm.
really make it all pop in your mind. Like
Mm-hmm.
I get that as a thing, but and that's kind of where my idea of like throwing everything in the wall and seeing what sticks comes from here, because like there just seems like there's so much randomness going on in this era. It's still like it's funny because it feels like it's still trying to find its footing a little bit in the kinds of things they want to focus on, and how
Mm-hmm.
and Hulk and Savage were clearly kind of like a revelation on that, um, because they realized just how much they could capitalize off these like insanely popular personalities, like to a higher degree than they'd ever experienced before, and that's kind of you can kind of see that as like the biggest through line from then to now of like how this company's evolved,
Mm-hmm.
but they're still not there yet. And so it leads to things that are entertaining and have some entertaining moments. I like again we had some fun things here. Partially, a lot of it tied to like the big personalities. Like Austin and I early on in the episode had a just broke out into laughter at one point over how beat red Randy Savage's
When he's
face
like
was while cutting a
screaming in
promo.
his
Um,
promos, he's
yeah, yeah, like that's really fun. Like his face literally like matched the color of Elizabeth's dress. So we have these really entertaining moments, but it's not quite there yet. And it's still they're still trying to like it still feels like their potential of the setups they give themselves.
mm-hmm.
Um, and so I guess more than anything, the kind of cool takeaway from this kind of thing is knowing that their storytelling ability is going to evolve from here. Because this might have felt lackluster, but you know it's going to get better. It's still going to
Mm-hmm.
not be perfect. Like every time we do a modern show, we complain about how overstuffed it is with filler, but there's something there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and I think this is kind of interesting just for me as for myself as a fan. It's kind of trying to figure out how they do tell stories in this time period when like
Mm-hmm.
you're like there's not a weekly primetime show where they do this kind of stuff. These big important shows are kind of like the only shows that Hogan was on, like the regular weekly TV was like you get to see these characters, and we'll talk when we get Elizabeth on here, our friend, not the character.
Yeah, not
When we get our
I God, imagine this podcast getting big enough that we could pull Randy Savage ex-wife Elizabeth as a guest for this show.
well,
You know
I'd
what?
have to,
That's my goal. That's my ultimate goal for this
okay, well,
podcast.
I'd also have to learn necromancy because she's dead.
Oh wait, she's dead? No!
she's been dead for like 20 years, so I'd have to pull some necromancy.
She was still alive. Oh
No, no. Anyway, as I was
no.
getting at is that like the weekly TV of this era is a lot of like dudes cutting promos to promote future matchups, but the actual matches are mostly like random important person versus a jobber, and like that's it. That's the whole match. That's all the matches every week,
Mm-hmm.
and that's so bizarre to me. And I don't, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around like how they do stories at this point when like that's the weekly TV.
Yeah.
But anyway,
There's yeah. Yeah. The the storytelling here is fairly shallow, which is not always
Mhm.
a bad thing. But
Mhm.
for people like us with more modern sensibilities,
Mhm.
there's kind of it kind of leaves this empty feeling in your stomach of yeah, this is some good ideas, but give me more.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to get into it as much as I want to, and I want to. I really do.
Yeah, like I said, I would love to be able to buy into all the hype here, but again, removed from the context of that era, it's so much harder to do, especially if your tastes lie outside of kind of their general aesthetic of this time period.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so I think that is a fantastic way to not, I guess, end our discussion here, but also transition into what we're doing next time. Because next time we're going to go back to something that certainly fulfills my greatest modern sensibilities. It is finally time to return to Lucha Underground,
Yes.
where we are gonna. I don't know when we're gonna do that episode because I don't know what our schedules are gonna look like. Because obviously, spoiler warning: next week is the week of Christmas. So what will our schedules be like? I don't know. So I can't really promise that next week is where we're going to do this. But next time we are going to talk about Lucha Underground, and
Mhm.
I'm ready because it's episode 9, and let's lay this out for you, David. Next time, 20 men and women will step into the ring. One one will remain, and that one will become the first ever Lucha Underground champion. The
Yes.
next time is Aztec Warfare.
Woohoo! I'm already pumped. Yes.
And all right. So that is what is on the plate for next time. It is time to do our sign off and do our plugs.
Yes. We are all over the social media now. We're on Twitter at Noobs and Knocks Pod. You can find us on YouTube, the Noobs and Knockouts podcast. You can find us on Spotify, Apple, and Google.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to contact the show, suggest episodes, give feedback, anything like that, you can also email us at noobsandknockouts.pod@gmail.com. And we try to drop episodes every week. That might get a little disturbed now because of the holiday season.
Holiday season,
But
yeah.
for the most part, we try to drop an episode every weekend. So be on the lookout for future episodes. Thank you for listening to this one, and we'll catch you all next time.
Thank you. We will catch you all on the flip side.